The bells won't stop ringing. Private First Class James Alderton presses his back against the shattered wall of a French farmhouse, and through the ringing, through the high hollow clang of iron striking iron, he can hear the MG42 adjusting, swinging, finding him. The bell tower of St. Cyr-sur-Meur's church stands 230 meters away, and for the last 4 hours it has been the reason men have been dying, not from its age, not from God. From the German spotter crouched inside its belfry, a Feldwebel from the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division, who rings that bell once when American infantry appears at the western approach, twice when they push through the orchard, 3 times when they get close enough to threaten the main defensive line. 3 rings means the MG42 nest behind the stone wall swings to bear. 3 rings means another squad of Americans ceases to exist. Alderton's entire assault platoon, 19 men, came over that ridge 40 minutes ago. 3 of them are still breathing. He knows because he can see where the others fell. He presses his hands flat against the wet October earth. His M1 Garand has 4 rounds left. He's counted twice because his mind keeps insisting there must be more. There aren't. His canteen is empty. The radio operator, Corporal Steets, caught a burst from the MG42 at the orchard wall, and the SCR 300 went into the ditch with him. Alderton has no communications, no backup, no water, and 4 bullets. And somewhere behind him on the ridge, new orders are crackling through a radio he can no longer reach. What he does in the next 90 minutes will be recorded in a U.S. Army after-action report as, quote, an act of individual initiative beyond the reasonable expectation of any combat commander. What the Germans will call it, in a captured SS field diary recovered 3 days later, is something else entirely. But before we get to what they called him, you need to understand what he was sent into. Because the Germans holding that position weren't ordinary soldiers. They were the best the Third Reich had positioned in southern France, and they had never, not once, lost a position they chose to defend. James Alderton grew up in Provo, Utah, the second of 4 sons born to a railroad worker and a school teacher who kept a garden so precise you could set a clock by the rows. He was 22 years old in October 1944. He stood 5 feet 10, weighed 160 pounds on a good day, and had hands that were slightly too large for his frame, the kind of hands that looked borrowed from a bigger man. His mother always said he had his grandfather's hands. His grandfather had been a stonemason in County Cork. He enlisted the week after Pearl Harbor, not in a fury, not in the stunned grief some men described. He enlisted quietly, the way he did most things, told his mother the night before, kissed her on the cheek, walked to the recruiting office in the morning. His younger brother Tommy, 17, tried to follow. James sent him home. In basic training at Camp Hood, Texas, his drill sergeant wrote in his evaluation, does not talk much, listens to everything, retains more than men who talk twice as much. By the time he shipped out with the 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds, his squad had given him a nickname that was not, for once, born of embarrassment or cruelty. They called him Quiet, not because he was timid, because in a firefight when other men were shouting and praying and cursing everything they'd ever known, Alderton went quiet. His breathing slowed. His eyes stopped moving quickly and started moving precisely. His squad mates said it was the most unnerving thing they had ever seen in a man who wasn't already dead. In his breast pocket, folded into a square small enough to fit behind his dog tags, was a letter, not from his mother, from his younger brother Tommy, dated September of 1942, written on the night before Tommy finally turned 18 and would himself be heading to a recruiting office come morning. The last line of that letter read, "Come home first, then I can go." James Alderton had been carrying that sentence across North Africa, Sicily, and southern France for 2 years. He had not yet come home. This video gives you the story, but the Combat Blueprint, our free newsletter, gives you everything that doesn't fit in a video. Deeper details, forgotten heroes. Free to join, 10 seconds to sign up. A link in the description. Now back in the video. The briefing came at 4:30 on October 14, 1944, in a stone barn 3 kilometers east of the village of Saint-Cyr-sur-Mer, where 2nd Lieutenant Harris of Baker Company, 180th Infantry Regiment, 45th Division, laid a hand-drawn map across a feed trough and told Alderton's platoon, 19 men, that they had a simple mission. It was not a simple mission. The church tower of Saint-Cyr-sur-Mer had been identified by regimental intelligence as a German forward observation post. A spotter in that tower had been directing artillery and machine gun fire against American advances along the coastal road for 6 days. The tower had to be taken. More precisely, the spotter had to be neutralized and the tower had to be captured intact, because U.S. Army engineers needed its height to establish their own observation line for the artillery push scheduled for the following morning. Lieutenant Harris told them the intelligence assessment. The tower was defended by a reinforced section, approximately 12 to 15 men, 1 MG-42, fortified positions at the church wall. What Lieutenant Harris did not know, because the intelligence officer who drafted that assessment had not received the most recent aerial reconnaissance photographs, which had arrived at regimental headquarters 6 hours earlier and would not be distributed until morning, was that the position had been reinforced the previous night. Significantly reinforced. The tower wasn't held by 15 men. It was held by a full platoon-strength detachment from the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division, 31 soldiers under the command of Obersturmführer Klaus Brandt, a 28-year-old Austrian from Graz who had fought at Kursk, survived Anzio, and been decorated twice for defensive actions that, by every tactical calculation, he should not have survived. Brandt had positioned his men not at the church but around it, in the farmhouses, behind the orchard walls, in a sunken lane to the north that did not appear on the Americans' maps. He had done this before dawn in silence, with the professional calm of a man who had been defending positions against superior forces since 1943, and had learned, with lethal precision, exactly how Americans attacked. 2 previous American attempts to take this road, one on October 9th, one on October 11th, had been turned back with a combined American casualty count of 23 men. Brandt had lost one. The MG-42 nest behind the main church wall had a kill corridor of 180 meters across the open ground between the orchard and the church. Brandt had registered the exact distances with stakes. His gunner, Unterscharführer Emmerich Vogt, 20 years old, from Munich, who had learned his trade in Russia, had fired that weapon in conditions far worse than this with a precision that was not skill alone. It was mastery. Baker Company's platoon went in at 600. They crossed the ridge. They entered the orchard. The bell rang once, then twice. Then the MG-42 opened up, and the plan 19 men, 1 simple mission, 1 Sunday morning stopped existing. Within 20 minutes, the platoon was in pieces. 3 men were down in the open ground. 4 had retreated to the orchard wall. 2 were unaccounted for. Alderton, Corporal Steets and Private Domings had pushed forward to within 60 meters of the church when the radio on Steets' back crackled with a message that turned everything to ash. New orders from battalion. A German armored counterattack had been reported 2 kilometers to the northeast. Baker Company's reserve was being redirected to reinforce the blocking position. The assault on the church was suspended. All units were to pull back to the ridge line and hold. Steets looked at Alderton. Domings looked at the church tower, where the bell had just rung again 3 times, and the MG-42 opened up somewhere behind them, and the 2 men they hadn't been able to find stopped being unaccounted for in the worst possible way. Alderton looked at the farmhouse wall he was pressed against, the same wall he had nearly died reaching, and then at the 60 meters of open ground between himself and the church entrance. Steets said, "We have to go back." Alderton said nothing. Steets grabbed his arm. "Alderton, we have to go back." Steets and Domings went back. The pull toward the ridge, toward the order, toward the logic of survival was absolute, and it was right, and it was the sane choice. James Alderton stayed. He had no radio. He had no backup. He had 4 rounds in his Garand and 2 fragmentation grenades on his belt and a folding bayonet and whatever was in his pockets. He had not eaten since the previous evening. His left forearm had been grazed by shrapnel during the initial push, and the field dressing was already soaked through. The mission was still active. He moves along the wall, not running. Walking low and controlled, each step placed deliberately, weight shifted heel to toe so the gravel doesn't speak. He has 60 meters to cover and an open courtyard between the last farmhouse and the church entrance, and he has 4 rounds, and the spotter in the bell tower will ring that bell the moment he steps into the open. He knows all of this. He moves anyway. From the bell tower, Obersturmführer Brandt watches the farmhouse wall through field glasses. He is experienced enough to have already noted what is strange. The Americans have gone quiet. The sounds of retreat have faded. There is no covering fire, no smoke round, no renewed push. There is only one man. He can see the silhouette barely against the stone, who appears to be moving toward the church rather than away from it. Brandt has been in this war long enough to know that one of 3 things is true. Either this American is suicidal, or he is a diversion, or something is already in motion that Brandt cannot yet see. He picks up his field telephone and tells Vogt at the MG-42 nest, "One man at the south wall, do not engage until he breaks cover. I want to know where the rest of them are." This is the correct tactical decision. It is also the decision that gives Alderton the 45 seconds he needs. He reaches the corner of the last farmhouse. The courtyard is 12 meters wide, open stone, no cover. The church door is wood and iron, partially ajar. He can see the shadow of a soldier inside the entrance. He goes still, slows his breathing, studies the courtyard. And then he sees it, what he will later describe in his statement as a drainage culvert running along the east wall about 18 inches wide, maybe 10 inches deep. Not a trench, not cover, just a shallow groove in the stone where rainwater runs. Barely enough to lie flat in. It is enough. He is 3 strides into the courtyard, pressed flat into the culvert when the ambush fires. It comes from the bell tower itself, not the spotter but a second man, a rifleman Brandt had positioned in the belfry specifically for this contingency. A man named Rottenführer Franz Hess, who has been lying flat against the tower's wooden floor for 3 hours waiting for exactly this moment. Hess fires 3 rounds in less than 2 seconds. All 3 kick stone from the courtyard surface within centimeters of where Alderton was standing 1 breath earlier. Alderton is already 5 centimeters lower than he was. The culvert. The drainage groove that no one would call cover, that a man would have to be desperate or very observant to think of in time. He fires once at the belfry window, not aiming, because there is nothing to aim at, but fires to make Hess duck to buy 2 seconds, and then he is on his feet and through the church door before the rifleman in the tower can acquire him again. 1 round left in the Garand. He is inside the church. What he does in the next 90 seconds made no tactical sense, until you understand what he had already seen in that quick, precise scan of the church interior that no one else on that battlefield could see. The interior of the church is shadow and stone and the smell of old incense underneath the newer smell of gun oil and male sweat and fear. Alderton is flat against the interior wall. 2 German soldiers in the nave, one by the altar, one at the side door to the north. Neither has seen him enter. The one at the altar is looking toward the front of the church, weapon up, watching the courtyard. The one at the side door has his back turned, but Alderton isn't looking at the soldiers. He's looking at the cluster of people pressed into the stone alcove behind the altar. An elderly man, 2 women, a boy maybe 9, maybe 10, who is holding a ceramic water jug with both hands as though it is the only solid thing left in the world. Civilians, 4 of them, hidden in the church since the fighting began, probably since dawn, probably since before Brandt's men arrived and turned their place of worship into a fortified position. The boy sees Alderton's uniform. His eyes go enormous. Alderton puts 1 finger to his lips. The boy does not move, does not make a sound. The jug trembles, but he holds it. Everything changes now. Not the objective, the tower still needs to fall, the spotter still needs to be taken, the mission is still active, but the route changes, the speed changes. The margin for error collapses to nothing, because any round that goes wide in this stone interior becomes a ricochet, and there are 4 people in that alcove who have survived this far. He cannot use the Garand. 1 round, but more than that, in this enclosed space, the muzzle blast and the stone will do their own damage. He slings the Garand, draws the M1911 from his holster, 7 rounds, and moves. The soldier at the side door dies before he understands there is an American in the church. Alderton takes his carabiner 98K and his ammunition belt and moves to the base of the bell tower stairs. The staircase is stone, narrow, winding clockwise, which means for a right-handed defender above it is perfect. Which means for Alderton, climbing, his weapon arm is compressed against the inner wall and his body is exposed on the outer. This is the oldest tactical disadvantage in castle architecture. The defenders built it this way for exactly this reason. He takes the stairs on the outside edge, weapon arm extended, and takes the first landing in a rush that doesn't give the rifleman above him time to react to something moving faster than it has any right to. Hess, the rifleman from the belfry, now on the landing above, fires once and misses by a width that will haunt him in post-war nightmares. Alderton fires twice and does not miss. He emerges into the belfry. The bell is enormous, iron, old. A rope hangs from its housing to a cleat on the wall, and tied to that cleat is a length of wire that runs out through the belfry's southern opening, a tripwire Alderton realizes stretched across the approach route from the ridge. Not a booby trap. A signal wire. When Americans cross the ridge and trip the wire, the bell rings automatically. The spotter doesn't even need to watch. The spotter, a thin unteroffizier named Georg Wenzel, 23, from Hamburg, is pressed against the northern wall with a pistol pointed at Alderton's chest, and his hand is shaking so badly that the pistol barrel describes small, terrible circles in the air between them. And here is the thing Alderton saw from the church floor that no one else would have noticed. The way the bell rope was knotted to the cleat was the same knot his father used to tie off fence wire on the Provo ranch. A simple tension cleat, 2 wraps and a half hitch. He knew in 3/4 of a second how to untie it, which meant the bell could stop ringing, which meant the MG42 would lose its signal, which meant for 30, maybe 45 seconds, the courtyard below would be unobserved. 30 seconds, that's what the irrational move was. He didn't take the belfry first to capture the spotter. He took it to untie the rope. He untied the rope before he dealt with Wenzel. Wenzel, whose pistol is shaking, who has been crouched in this tower since before dawn, who has watched 20 Americans die in the fields below and understood in some cellular part of himself that this was not supposed to reach him, that his tower was supposed to be unreachable, stares at the American soldier who has just untied the bell and looks at him with an expression that has nothing tactical left in it. Nichts schießen, Wenzel says, don't shoot. His pistol lowers. Alderton takes it from him. Zip ties his hands with a field restraint, standard equipment, 3 pairs per soldier, and sits him against the belfry wall. The bell is silent. Below in the courtyard, Brandt's radio crackles with confusion. His signals section, watching from the orchard, reports that the bell has stopped. Vogt at the MG42 adjusts his barrel toward the church door and waits for instructions that are slow in coming. But Alderton is already back on the stairs, moving down, moving through the nave, checking on the civilians in the alcove. The old man has his arm around the boy. The jug is on the floor. The boy is watching Alderton with eyes that have stopped being afraid and started being something else. And then out through the side door into the north yard, where the main German defensive position is 30 meters away, and the mission is still active. His M1911 has 4 rounds remaining. He moves toward the German position. He stops behind a rusted agricultural cart north yard, presses his back against the iron wheel. His hands are shaking. He looks at them, the 2 large hands, the stonemason's hands, and presses them flat against the wheel just to make them stop. The iron is cold, October cold. Southern France in October is not the cold that kills you, but it is the cold that finds the places where you are already broken and sits inside them. He has not slept in 31 hours. He has not eaten since yesterday at dusk. Half a ration tin of corned beef that Private Domings shared with him because Alderton had given his own to a boy in a village 3 days earlier whose hunger had been visible from 10 feet away. His arm is bleeding again. The field dressing has failed. He wraps his left hand around the wound and squeezes and tries not to think about the color of the blood. He thinks about Tommy instead. Come home first, then I can go. Tommy is in the Pacific now. Alderton doesn't know exactly where. The mail moves strangely between theaters, but the last letter had a postmark that told him enough. Tommy is in the Pacific, and he is 20 years old, and he told James he would wait. He said he would not go until James came home. He lied because Tommy Alderton was constitutionally unable to wait for anything when there was something worth doing. And James had known this the day he read the letter, and loved his brother for it, and been terrified by it in equal measure. Come home first. He cannot come home if he stops here, not because retreat isn't possible, it is still barely, but because if he stops, the bell gets untied by someone else, and the wire gets reattached, and tomorrow morning when the 45th pushes again, the bell rings and Vogt's MG42 swings around and finds the next 19 Americans who come over that ridge. He thinks about the boy in the alcove, the ceramic jug. The way the boy held it with both hands like ballast against the planet itself shifting beneath his feet. He closes his eyes, 1 breath in, holds it. From the German position 30 meters away he can hear voices. Brandt's voice, he recognizes its authority even through the language barrier, trying to reorganize, trying to understand why the bell stopped, calling names, getting answers from some positions, silence from others. The silence is doing something to Brandt's men that no artillery could have done. It is making them count. Alderton opens his eyes. He counts his resources one more time, the way a man counts what he has left, not to know the number but to know the fact of it, to accept it. M1911, 4 rounds, 2 grenades. Carabiner 98K with 11 rounds, 1 prisoner in the tower, 4 civilians in the nave, 1 mission. He stands up, he does not move fast. Fast gets you killed in a defended position when you are alone and carrying a dead man's rifle. He moves exactly, which is different. Each position chosen before the last one is left, from the north yard to the east wall. The east wall to the gap in the stone fence. The gap to the corner of the outbuilding where 2 of Brandt's soldiers are positioned behind a stone barricade with a clear line to the main gate. They are not looking at the east wall, they are looking at the main gate, where the threat is supposed to come from. The threat is now 4 meters behind them. 1 grenade. He pulls the pin, counts 2, rolls it low along the base of the barricade where it will be heard a half-second before it detonates, which is enough time to flinch but not enough time to run. The explosion is enormous in the confined space, stone and sound magnified tenfold, and before the dust resolves, Alderton is through the gap and moving. Brandt's voice rises sharply from somewhere to the north. Commands, commands, commands. But there is something wrong in the voice now. Alderton doesn't speak German, but he was raised by a woman who taught him to listen, and what he can hear in Brandt's voice beneath the command structure is the thing the command structure is designed to conceal. Brandt doesn't know where the attacks are coming from. The bell stopped. 1 section stopped reporting. Now the outbuilding position has gone silent without a shot being fired at it. The explosion was inward, not incoming. Brandt's radio section on the ridge has seen nothing. His observers have seen nothing. The reports coming into Brandt's position describe an enemy that should not exist, 1 man, hitting from angles that require him to be in 3 places simultaneously. Why viel sind de draußen? Brandt demands into his field telephone. How many are out there? Silence on the line. Then, wir wissen nicht. We don't know. Alderton comes around the north wall of the churchyard and Brandt sees him. Directly, from 20 meters. The first time the German officer has had a clear visual on the American since the assault began. He is a single man carrying a German rifle with an American pistol on his belt, moving through a position that Brandt's 31-man detachment was specifically deployed to make impassable. Brandt is a professional. He has been in this war for 3 years. He draws his Walther P38 and fires twice, and both rounds miss because his hand, for the first time in this war in 3 years of combat, in a dozen defensive actions he has never once lost, is not as steady as it always has been. He is afraid. Not of dying, he has made peace with dying. He is afraid of something he cannot name, which is worse, which is the kind of fear that dissolves the architecture of training from the inside. Alderton fires the carabiner 3 times. The MG42 nest behind the main wall goes silent. Vogt, who has survived Russia and North Africa and the Italian campaign and the first 6 days of this fight without a scratch, is no longer at his weapon. 2 of Brandt's men break from their position at the east fence and run. Not tactically, not falling back to a secondary position, not covering each other. Running, abandoning their weapons. Brandt shouts at them, they do not stop. A voice from the sacristy outbuilding, a young Sturman who cannot be more than 18, calls out in German and then in fractured childhood lesson English, "American, we come out, we come out." Brandt looks at the man who has done this, who has taken his bell tower and his outbuilding and his MG42 nest and his best riflemen and his spotters, and has walked through everything he had like it was only an inconvenience, who has done this alone, who has done this after being ordered to retreat. Waffen nieder, Brandt says, weapons down, not to Alderton, to his own men. The last weapon in the position, a Schmeisser MP40 held by a white-faced Rottenführer at the church wall, is set on the stone with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Alderton stands in the courtyard of the church of St. Cyr-sur-Mer, surrounded by what is left of an elite 17th SS Panzergrenadier defensive position, and the whole world goes briefly, absolutely quiet. He lowers the rifle. He walks back inside the church. The civilians are still in the alcove. The old man has not moved. The two women are holding each other. The boy with the jug is standing now, and he looks at Alderton, at the blood on his arm, the German rifle in his hand, the American uniform, and sets the jug down on the stone floor with the careful deliberateness of a child deciding that the solid things can hold themselves now. Alderton sits down on a church pew. His hands shake for a long time before they stop. U.S. Army forces from Baker Company reached the church of St. Cyr-sur-Mer at 9:43 hours on October 14, 1944, 51 minutes after Private First Class James Alderton had taken the position. What they found, documented in the Baker Company after-action report filed by Lieutenant Harris, was the following: 1 bell tower secured, 1 forward observation post neutralized, 1 MG42 and crew eliminated, 2 German soldiers killed, 7 wounded, 11 captured and awaiting processing. The wire apparatus that had been ringing the bell as an automatic signaling device had been dismantled with what the report described as apparent knowledge of rope rigging. Sergeant Walt Briggs, the first NCO through the church door, would tell the story for the rest of his life. He described finding Alderton sitting alone in a pew, still holding the German rifle, with the church's civilian occupants gathered in the row behind him, an elderly man, 2 women, a young boy, as though they were attending a service for which no one had written the liturgy. He didn't say anything, Briggs recalled in a 1971 Veterans of Foreign Wars interview. I asked him what happened and he just looked at me. Then he said, "I need water." That was all. The 11 captured Germans from the position were processed through divisional intelligence over the following 48 hours. What emerged from those interrogations has since become, among historians of the 45th Infantry Division, the most quoted enemy testimony of the entire southern France campaign. The interrogating officer, Captain Leonard Fowles, asked the first prisoner, Obersturmführer Klaus Brandt, directly, "How many Americans attacked your position?" Brandt looked at him for what Fowles described as an uncomfortably long time. Then he said, "1." Fowles wrote in his report. Subject appeared unwilling to elaborate. When pressed, he said only, "1 man." When I told him our records showed a full platoon had been assigned to the assault, he shook his head. He said the platoon had retreated. He said only 1 man had remained. I asked if he was certain. He said he was certain because he had seen him. He said, "I looked at him in my courtyard, and I understood that we were finished." Vogt, the MG42 gunner recovered from the main wall position, was asked what he had seen. He had been in the defensive position since dawn and had serviced his weapon through 2 full engagements that week. When he was asked about the final assault through an interpreter, he stared at the wall for a moment before answering. He said, "The bell stopped and everything stopped with it. We waited for orders. The orders were confused. Then there were sounds from places that made no sense. We couldn't count what was happening. It felt like the attack was coming from everywhere, from inside the walls." He paused. "It was one man," the interpreter relayed. "He says it was one man and he still cannot fully believe it." Among the 11 captured German soldiers, 2 separate accounts independently recorded that Brandt's men had given the American a name during the final minutes of the assault, called it to each other in the chaos, as a way of explaining what was happening to them, the way soldiers name things they cannot otherwise categorize. They called him Der Glöckner loosely, the bell ringer, not because he rang the bell, because he stopped it. Because the moment the bell went silent was the moment their entire defensive system, the wire, the signal, the machine gun, the registered kill corridor, collapsed, and they all knew it, and the name came from the sound of its absence. The captured diary of Rottenführer Franz Hess, the rifleman in the belfry whose 3 shots had missed Alderton in the courtyard, contained this entry, written several days after the battle from a holding facility. "The American who came into the tower, I had 3 shots and he was already below me. I don't know how he moved that fast. He took my rifle, he tied my hands, he could have shot me and he didn't. I have thought about this every day since. I do not understand him. I don't think he can be understood." The 4 civilians from the church were interviewed by an army chaplain and a French liaison officer the following day. The elderly man, a retired schoolteacher named Marcel Bonnet, 67 years old, was asked through translation whether the American soldier had spoken to them at any point during the assault. He said the American had not spoken. He said that when the soldier came back into the church after the final assault and sat down in the pew, Bonnet's grandson, the boy with the jug, had approached him and handed him the jug. It still had water in it. The soldier drank from it, Bonnet told the interviewer. And then he said thank you to my grandson in English. My grandson doesn't speak English, but he understood. Private First Class James Alderton was recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross by Baker Company's commanding officer. The recommendation was upgraded. On April 12, 1945, by order of the President of the United States, James Alderton was awarded the Medal of Honor. The official citation, read into the Congressional Record, stated in part, "Private First Class Alderton, single-handedly and in direct opposition to orders to withdraw, engaged and neutralized a heavily fortified enemy observation and defensive position that had effectively blocked the regiment's axis of advance for 6 days. Acting without support, communications, or resupply, and while sustaining wounds, Private First Class Alderton neutralized the enemy's signaling capability, secured the observation post, cleared enemy combatants from the position, and ensured the safety of 4 French civilians sheltering within the objective. His actions directly enabled the resumption of the regimental advance and saved an estimated number of American casualties that, by the commanding general's own assessment, would have run to several dozen in the subsequent morning assault. Alderton came home to Provo in the summer of 1945. His mother met him at the train station. His brother Tommy, who had survived the Pacific, who had made it home 3 weeks ahead of him, was standing next to her. He never gave public interviews about Saint-Cyr-sur-Mer. When the Provo Daily Herald ran a story on him in 1946 and asked what he remembered most about the day, he was quiet for a long time before answering. Then he said, "A boy gave me water, that's what I remember." He lived in Provo until 1991. He was a stonemason like his grandfather. His hands were large. They were always slightly too large for his frame. He was buried with his Medal of Honor and the letter from his brother Tommy, which had spent the entire war in a square fold behind his dog Tags, and still, by the time it was retired to his breast pocket for good, smelled faintly of gun oil and something sweeter that no one in the family could ever quite name. Let's stop here for a moment, not to summarize. You just lived through the story. You don't need it explained, but think about what happened. He was given intelligence that was wrong. Not slightly wrong, catastrophically wrong. The position he was sent to take with 19 men was held by 31 elite soldiers from a division that had never lost. He was given new orders at the worst possible moment. His unit retreated correctly and reasonably as ordered. He was left alone with 4 bullets, a wound, no water, and a mission that every rational calculation said was over. He had every right to walk back. He had orders to walk back. No one would have blamed him. The army would have retried in the morning with better intelligence and a full company. But the bell would have kept ringing. There is a specific kind of courage that has no audience, that isn't witnessed, that doesn't come with the approval of command or the encouragement of brothers in arms. That happens in the moment after all of those things have been removed, when it is only a man and a wall and a choice and the particular gravity of a letter in a breast pocket that reads, "Come home first." The courage happened. A German officer said, "I looked at him in my courtyard and I understood that we were finished." A rifleman who tried to kill him 3 times wrote in his diary that he could not be understood. An 11-year-old boy in a French church gave him the last water in a ceramic jug. None of them had any reason to lie. To the veterans watching this, you know this weight. The kind that doesn't make the news and doesn't decorate well and doesn't explain itself at dinner tables in peacetime. You know what it is to make a choice in the space after everything else is gone. You don't need me to name it. To everyone else, James Alderton grew up in Provo, Utah. He was a railroad worker's son with 2 large hands and a younger brother he loved and a gift for going quiet when everything else was loud. He was not different from the men on either side of him. He was not designed for what that day required. He just did not stop. He came home. He kept his promise to Tommy. He became a stonemason like his grandfather, laying stone with hands that were slightly too large for his frame, hands that had untied a bell rope and dismantled a German defensive line, and accepted a jug of water from a French boy who understood thank you in a language he'd never been taught. He is buried in Utah. The bell of Saint Cyr still hangs in its tower. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you never miss these forgotten stories of extraordinary American courage. Who should we tell next? Drop their name in the comments.